Xenotransplantation, from the Greek xenos, meaning foreign, is where you take the organ from one species and put it into another. The first human heart transplant 60 years ago was an example of such a thing when James D. Hardy took the heart of a chimpanzee and put it into Boyd Rush, not terribly successfully. In the car world, the equivalent of a heart transplant is of course the engine swap. And this, well, this might just be one of the best automotive xenotransplantations ever.
This is the Rocketeer MX-V6, a little car with a bigger heart.
Sometimes my job is very simple, really. This is a Mazda MX-5 with a V6 engine in it. And it's every bit as good as you think it is. Lovely gargle, it builds and builds all the way to 7,000 RPM. It's a really good sounding engine. It also gives me so much pleasure that this is financially, well, as accessible as the handling, really. I'm so aware that so many of the resto mods and the cars in general that I drive are out of reach for so many, me included, really. But this feels attainable.
If you're happy with the smell of Swarfiga in the morning, then DIY kits start from under 10 grand. However, the most popular option is to bring Rocketeer and MX-5 and have them do the heavy lifting. This turnkey engine swap will set you back about £20,000, but be warned, most people do get tempted and start adding a few extra options, inevitably pushing the price up. If you want to go all in, then the full-blooded back to bare metal, tip-top, totally trimmed resto mod option will relieve you of around £70,000. That's obviously quite dear by MX-5 standards, which is why most tread the more fiscally frugal routes. But even so, a resto mod that isn't six figures is about as rare as a standard 964 these days, and the MX-5 is an icon.
You think of a basic sports car and you think of a Mazda MX-5. This is sports cars in at the ground floor. What the push-up, press-up is to exercises, this is to sports cars. It's simple, but brilliantly effective.
The first, or NA, Mazda MX-5, or Miata, or Unos, was launched in 1989, and over 430,000 units had emerged from the Hiroshima factory by the time the second generation arrived in 1997. Its pop-ups and smiley Lightning McQueen face were actually designed in California, and the 1960s Lotus Elan was taken as the guiding dynamic benchmark. Suspended on double wishbones with anti-roll bars front and rear, disc brakes all round and a limited slip diff as an option, early cars had a 1.6 litre engine, putting out 115 brake horsepower before a 1.8 was introduced, with a bump to around 130 brake horsepower and 110 pounds-feet of torque. Just enough for 1,000 kilos or 2,200 pounds, distributed 50-50. But how did this car come about? Bruce Southey is the man who had the plan, and while you might not have heard of him, he's been in the car industry all his working life. He went to Coventry University to study transport design, where Simon Saunders, founder of Ariel, was his lecturer. His class was featured in Autocar magazine. He designed the Bristol Fighter and the Mode Me bicycle for Ford. Unsurprisingly, he does all the CAD work for Rocketeer himself, but he never intended to build a business.
This is the car that started it all. It's been through God knows how many iterations, but this was the first prototype. It was built for myself as a one-off, but
so that's where it starts. So it's just a sort of your personal. I want to put it wasn't done with a business kind of.
I want a sports car that isn't too big, too heavy, but is, you know, lithe and powerful and so on and so forth. And we've talked about, you know, how that the engine choice came about.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, this is the car that started it all.
Bruce got some press coverage for his car, and after people expressed interest, he said that if he got some deposits, he'd do some kits. The deposits came in.
I was made redundant a couple of years ago, and the decision was made then to go, right, okay, I'll do this full time. Until then, it was just a sideline.
Yeah. And how many kits have you done, or cars have you done now?
Kits in total, it's about 150 over those 7 years now. And again, it's it's evolved over that time, of which about 30 cars have been built here by us.
Yeah.
So, yeah, turnkey cars.
The name Rocketeer was partly conjured by the idea of the plucky British engineer in a shed, and partly the notion of Newton's third law, of which the rocket engine is a great example, and the ethos of this car being a reaction in opposition to the ever heavier, more complicated mainstream car industry. I prefer the men in the sheds bit, to be honest. Anyway, what about this V6?
Why the AJ30? The original, I looked at turbocharging, I looked at supercharging, none of which really flicked the switch. I wanted something exotic, and 4 cylinders just wasn't going to do it. So V8 was the obvious choice. I worked at Overfinch, so there were V8s littering the workshop floor. But that just didn't feel right. It's not right. It's not a muscle car, it never was. So my good friend who at Overfinch at the time suggested having a look at the Ford V6. 6 obviously makes sense. You know, 8's too many, 4's too few. Where do you go? V configuration, Italian, you know, Alfa Romeo,
Yeah.
Busso engine. Perfect choice. That's got to be right. But actually, it's not that powerful. It's a little bit heavy. They're quite difficult to get hold of, and they're expensive. And my good friend at Overfinch suggested have a look at the Ford. It's an absolute gem. Ford's best kept secret. He had one in a 2.5 litre form in a ST24, and did some research. And they've made like 3 million of them.
Yeah.
They've
been in all sorts of
they've
things.
been in all sorts of
Nobles
things.
did it with
Nobles,
turbocharging stuff.
yeah, absolutely right. But they somehow found its way into humble S-type Jaguars and XF and XJ. And the best of the bunch was the one that's in the Jaguar. Cosworth did the heads. Porsche allegedly did the original design. It's over square, so it revs to the heavens. So it's just like, oh, okay, we'll try this. And there was no real way of knowing it without, well, just build it. And so I bought a written off old S-type and procured my wife's rusty old MX-5. And there was no real way of knowing until without actually building it. Yeah. And I must admit, the first time we drove it, it was terrible. It was, you know, the mapping was all over the place. Things were touching things. It was ghastly. But there was you know,
something about it.
We're onto something here. This is going to work. So yeah,
So what we've got now, what have you done to it? What are the specs? What is it?
We actually do very little except rebuild it. They're rebuilt by a company called Bassett Down Balancing in Hungerford. He approached me after a kit, and I approached him after an engine to build an engine. I was like, hang on a minute, haven't I just spoken to you? So we became good friends and exchanged ideas, and I ended up, he's been building all our engines ever since. And he basically just rebuilds them. They're reconditioned, but if you like, blueprinted. So he'll match all the pistons and all the rods and everything, so they're all the same weight, and he'll balance the flywheel with the clutch and all that sort of thing. So they're much, much sweeter than a standard engine, noticeably. There were a handful of new ones left over, which we managed to get some of, but generally speaking, we rebuild them.
The stock Jaguar engine puts out around 240 brake horsepower, but with Rocketeer's headers, induction system and map, the 3 litre is good for about 280 bhp. Some cams have been designed to take it to 320, and with even more work, they've now got one to 375 brake horsepower and 9,000 RPM. Thankfully, because it's a better balanced engine than the original, they've managed to keep the lovely Mazda M526 gearbox, despite the power hike. Even better, the weight of the AJ30 engine is fractionally lighter than the original 1.8 that comes out.
With the inline 4, you'd feel like you really needed to go chasing the revs to get anything from that engine, but in this, from the word go, it makes you smile. The whole car feels sort of fuller, really, as soon as you get into it.
In this spec, I think the V6 feels best in the mid-range. Although it will rev, its natural cadence feels like 3 to 5,500 RPM. But regardless of where you are in the revs, the engine is fabulously responsive, reacting beautifully to a blip.
And because the weight hasn't changed, you can still enjoy it in the corners just as much as before, but with all that extra power and torque, again, it's easier to exploit the chassis, to really massage the grip. A car like this, well, any car really, the handling, the enjoyment you get is through the weight transfers and the management of those weight transfers, through the steering, through the pedals. That's what the enjoyment is. And so the fact that it has a lightweight engine in it that hasn't changed any of the MX-5's fundamentals is so important.
The Rocketeer is like a controlled experiment, with just one facet changed.
This is a bit like steak and chips. It's just that they've used a better piece of meat, a better cut of meat in this. It's still the same meal, still the same enjoyment, just elevated slightly where it really matters. This really is just such an easy car to enjoy. The fact this is still naturally aspirated as well, that all the extra power and torque isn't coming through turbocharging, means it doesn't upset the car at all.
The interior of this car is very blue, but beautifully trimmed in leather and Alcantara. It would need a wholesale redesign of the switchgear to really elevate it and disguise its humble roots, so it's not in the realm of something like an Eagle E-Type, but there are nice touches, like the dials with their Alaska Project pointers and nods to aviation.
Really, the basic ingredients in this are exactly what I would want in a high-end supercar. Something like Gordon Murray's cars are based on exactly the same sort of philosophy, really. Manual box, lightweight, naturally aspirated multi-cylinder engine, good ride quality, great steering feel, nice pedal placement. It's all in this as well. This car's got Meister R dampers on it. You can choose what you like, really. There's so much out there for the MX-5, but it rides pretty well. You could do perhaps just a little more control, but it's nice and still pretty soft. Feels like a pretty nice road setup. This road's bumpy, but it's still comfortable. Come into a corner like this, change down, tax in so beautifully, and then that sort of lightweight rear end. And because you've got the same contact patch at each corner, we've got a 195 50 R15 tyre. So it's so predictable and easily managed because you're dealing with the same amount of grip all round. It feels fluid. I'm not saying that all other sports cars, anything more expensive, anything faster, is somehow irrelevant. I mean, it's still not the stiffest car. It never was. And even with everything that Rocketeer has done to this, it's still not. And obviously there's a thrill with more power and more speed and more grip and higher revs and all those things, but there is also something wonderful about how easy it is to access the fundamental joys of a sports car in this.
And of course, as is human nature, Bruce is looking to push the Miata envelope, developing a series of lightweight parts from more exotic materials. And the AJ30 certainly has potential.
That sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
Give you a flavour of what the engine can be like.
What it can be like.
Yeah,
so this is, because I can see the Palmer, I used to spend a lot of time down at Bedford Autodrome. So
it's a JP1. So it's the corporate entertainment car.
But they did some road...
They did some road legal ones, and this is one of the road legal ones.
Okay.
I mean, it came to us because the engine was getting a bit tired.
Yeah.
And we do the engine. So it's got cams and some sort of saucier internals, and we've done a lot of head work. But yeah, and it's got equal length headers, and there's no silencers on it and stuff. So yes, it's fruity. It's about 340 horsepower.
Yeah.
But significantly, it's about 260 foot-pound of torque all the way through. And it's made a big difference.
That sounds ace, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it's 600 kilos.
That'll do, yeah.
Bruce has also put the V6 into the MB, or second generation MX-5, and he's now working on the now very affordable NC platform, which is a surprisingly tight squeeze for the V6, and because the later four-cylinder is lighter, has required a bit more shuffling of weight to keep the distribution the same, but it should broaden the concept's appeal even further once finished. For now, perhaps the biggest compliment I can pay the Rocketeer MX-V6 is that if no xenotransplantation were necessary, if Mazda had done a V6 MX-5 as one of its many, many special editions, I think this is what it would have been like.